Is Nicole here?
No, I don't see her.
Nicole is on a plane.
She wanted to present something.
Yeah, if she's not able to join the meeting, I'm going to present on her behalf.
Oh, great. Thanks, Vicky.
Also, I just want to acknowledge for anybody who's having anxiety about Berkeley High's fire. I'm just thinking of everybody and anybody who's impacted, and I know the kids are out safe, but I just wanted to acknowledge that that may or may not be information you've received. So just going to share that I think it's okay.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Okay, so Pauline, are you gonna start the meeting?
Yes, we can get started. I was gonna give our superintendent a few minutes to join us, but we can actually get started. So I'm gonna take us, everybody has this slide deck. I've now made it so you can share it. Sorry about that. Vivian, if we can just fast forward to the agenda. We have a lot to cover. So let's go through the agenda and just make sure it's like on the third or fourth slide. Here we go. So we're gonna do public comments, and I think Vivian already gave everybody the time. Evan's hand is up still. Evan, did you have a question? Sheena is at the high school due to the fire. Okay, and then our agenda, we're gonna be looking at revisiting staffing and program. So we're going to look at the LCFF funds. We're going to be looking at staffing and personnel updates, additional funding, the presentation from Nicole, which is now Vicky, the other side of the budget equation. So why don't we start public comment, and Vivian, you can decide who is going first and who's going next.
Timer,
Okay, as I mentioned earlier, public comment you'll have 1 minute, okay? So Min Yang, you're first.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Minnie.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Yuehao Chen. It goes by Sam. I have two sons attending schools within the Berkeley School District. I'm here today to continue funding of our school's garden and cooking program. Over the past few years, I have personally witnessed the positive impact of this program. In the garden, our city kids experienced the miracle of life firsthand for the first time. It's about much more than just mere gardening techniques. It opens their eyes and hearts to the wisdom and rhythm of nature. Classroom learning is linear, but in the garden, thousands of living things are happening simultaneously. They're spontaneous, messy, and profound. Kids learn to watch and wait patiently, to do the right thing at the right moment. The web of life is deeply interconnected. There's no standard test that will tell us to measure it, but I firmly believe kids become more resilient and more prepared for success and setbacks in their life. They'll have lower rate of depression, lower risk of suicide, and higher overall well-being. So please keep the funding for our garden program.
Thank
you, Minnie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's like a lot.
Are you guys ready for the next comment?
Can you guys hear? Yeah.
Cyrus.
Hi, I'm Shyrus Correa. My wife is a Berkeley Unified teacher and my daughter is a BUSD middle schooler. I'm deeply disturbed by the news that the body is looking to cut funding for garden programs. In this era of a spiraling mental health crisis among our youth, in a time of unprecedented emotional and social strain, ecological collapse, and climate anxiety, cutting the garden program would be so out of touch that I can't even get my head around it. Our family lives in a small one-bedroom. We have some houseplants, but we'll never be able to afford a home with a garden. It's something we wistfully dream about, but we don't fool ourselves about the economic realities of living here. And thank goodness that my daughter and so many children like her can go to the garden. Thank goodness that in our world where it seems like so much is dying, there's a place that she can go where there's wonderful, passionate people that can show them that things can grow, that you can slow down, that you can feel the earth under your feet and in your hands, that you can be connected to something other than a screen. The garden program is a precious, profound, and pure good for our students in our community, and to cut it would be a destructive and I believe an immoral choice.
Thank you. So I see a few hands up. Public comment is closed for this meeting. And if you can hold your questions until afterwards, that would be good. Otherwise, the next person is Chris.
Right. Hi, I'm Chris Nicow, and I'm one of the BUSD cooking and gardening teachers here representing our program. Excuse me. I began my career in the year 2000, and I currently teach at all 3 of our CDCs, as well as at Rosa Parks Elementary School. Unfortunately, BUSD is no longer wants to pay the $300,000 out of the general fund to support our program, which serves approximately 5,800 students. Instead, the current district proposal is to fund only $100,000, which currently leaves our program with about a $60,000 deficit. Subsequently, any cuts in garden teachers' FTE would equate to fewer students having cooking and gardening classes, as less FTE would possibly result in particular grades at our school sites no longer participating in gardening classes. We already have staff who are spread between multiple sites, most of whom do not work full-time, and so our current staffing is and has been bare bones. If our FTEs get reduced and dip below that magical 0.72 FTE number, we lose our healthcare benefits. What we need is for the SBAC to please consider increasing the contribution proposed to the general fund to $160,000 rather than $100,000 and continue to help sustain our precious program. Thank you.
The next person is Lilu.
Thank you.
Hello, I attend the Berkeley Independent Study Garden Program. The garden class has been such an impact on me this year. Like my dad said, I live in a one-bedroom, so I don't have the opportunity to tend a garden on my own. With the BIS Garden Program, I get to really experience the joys of gardening, and being among the beautiful flowers and butterflies is such an incredible opportunity for me. The community and friendships that form in the garden program are very special, and being in the garden program has also made me a healthier person. Learning about the health benefits of eating plants has made me enjoy eating more fruits and vegetables. And I think it's really important for all children to have a chance to garden and to learn about the natural world around us.
Thank you. BC?
Hi, thank you. My name is Cece Mixa. I'm a BUSD parent of 2 children and also a counselor at King Middle School. Both of my daughters went through the garden program at Franklin with teacher Chris, and they absolutely love him and continue in gardening at Ruth Actie right now. My husband is also a product of the gardening and cooking program, and to this day is an excellent cook and loves being in the garden. These teachers go above and beyond. When my older daughter was in Franklin in 2020 and everything shut down, we opened our door one day to find a caterpillar and some leaves on our front porch so that they could continue to interact with the plants and animals in a really beautiful way that really helped carry us through several weeks at our home. To this day, my daughter, when she gets overwhelmed, will go out into the dirt and dig or plant seeds. It is her favorite coping skill. And as a counselor, I cannot speak highly enough to the mental health benefits of grounding, being outside, and connecting with nature. My daughters both understand the importance of looking after our natural world and where their food comes from, and are excited to eat the fruits and vegetables that they grow. This program is essential, and I hope you will continue to fund it and increase the funding as needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person is Emily.
Hello, thank you. So my son goes to Berkeley Independent Study with Lilu, who you heard from a moment ago. And my daughter went there prior to my son. And it's a fantastic program. During COVID, in fact, they ran cooking classes online, and my son still to this day makes recipes that he learned at that time. If anything, I would like to see the funding increase for the garden teacher at that school, not decrease. She has put in way more hours than she's getting paid for to maintain and rejuvenate that garden, which had a hard hit during COVID when, you know, there was a lot of time away from the garden. So anything you can do to shuffle the funding around to make sure we don't lose this fantastic program, in particular at BIS, it is pretty much the only class where kids get to interact with other students at the campus because everything else is independent study. And they take full advantage of that, having social time with each other, doing a lot of mindfulness in the class. So
Thank you.
I super applaud that program.
Thank you. Evan?
Hello. Hello, my name is Dia, and I go to Sylvia Mendez, and I'm in 3rd grade, and I love, and I want you to keep funding garden classes at the same level because I love garden class. It's my favorite class in the whole school. It makes me happy and calm. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Emma?
Hi, thanks so much. My name's Emma. I'm a Malcolm X parent and here to oppose any cuts to that garden program. I echo everything that has already been said in support of the program, and I'll just, in the interest of time, add that my kids really don't like vegetables, but when I give them Ms. Rivka's kale salad, they actually eat their vegetables and they eat all of their vegetables. And I am so grateful for the impact that garden class has had on their nutrition. It is enormous and we will really, really miss it. And our kids will be harmed if it goes away. So thanks for your time.
Doing that instead of tonight?
Thank you. So anyone who logged in after we started public comment, you can email me your comments if you like to add to the record.
Yeah,
My
but
email
that's
address
it. You're not
Vivian.
get playing video games then tonight, and I'll be gone.
Wait, but no, half an hour of this in exchange for the half an hour that I lost. So I'm gonna.
My email is vivianferguson@berkeley.net. That's one word. Thank you. The next person for public comment is Gabrielle Cohen.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, my name is Gabrielle Cohen, and I'm a UC Berkeley student, and I'm currently volunteering with the garden program at John Muir Elementary School to complete my capstone in food systems. I would like to support continued funding of the garden and cooking programs. In the few months that I've been working with at John Muir, I've seen how valuable the garden programming is. It's created value for me, giving me invaluable classroom experience and learning about how to maintain a garden classroom. For the kids, I've seen how the program helps them become more connected to their food and nutrition, how it meets science standards, and become more connected to natural spaces and a very urban environment. Please recognize the value of this program and continue to fund this pioneering program. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. So that concludes public comment. Again, if you logged in after we started and you have something you'd like to email me, the email address is vivianferguson@berkeley.net. Thank you. Pauline?
Mute, sorry. Hi, guys. Sorry about it. I was on mute. I was prattling on. Inikia and Jill and Sam are not with us at this moment. Jill and Sam have the next few slides. So Vivian, if we go to the next presentations, we can skip over the LCFF supplemental funding. Jill is going to present that when she comes. Oh, Jill is here. Jill? I see her. Jill? Hi, Jill. Are you going to present the next slides or should we move forward with the other ones?
Colleen, can you move forward for a second? Because my computer's doing something funny.
Okay. I'm not sure if Sam is here. Sam is here.
Yes.
Okay, so Sam, if you could present your slides, that would be great.
Okay. Okay, so we have a ed code timeline, which for layoff notices, which is March 15th and May 15th. March 15th is the preliminary list that went to the board. It went on March 8th. And then May 15th is when we have to give final notices. So there's a list going to the board, actually tonight, on May 1st, for that. So, we have two versions of the list on the agenda tonight. I will talk about that a little bit. But I want to tell you what's changed, in terms of those between the two, meetings, or the two lists. We also, are gonna talk about, the staffing formula and its impact. And then also looking at, the bus driver positions and the proposal to freeze those. Next slide. So, what has been removed from the layoff list? So March 15th, March 8th, we took the March 15th list to the board. There were positions on there that were BHS, BSEP site discretionary positions. Those positions have been removed because the SSC voted to approve the funding for next year for these positions. So those positions have received notices which are rescinding the layoff. We also have positions at Malcolm X from their PTA, from Cragmont, from a couple other sites where, hold on a second, I can give you exactly. Sylvia Mendez, Cragmont, Malcolm X, and Rosa Parks that have been saved from layoff notices that are PTA positions because we've received checks from the PTA. Or there's a plan in place to use Prop 28 funding to save those. Click. We've also are looking at that some LCAP positions are safe because of the amount of funds in LCAP moving forward. And one more click. We also, based on the presentation that you had at our last meeting, some of the cooking and gardening positions have been deemed rescinded and safe at this point. And we will have an update on that, I think, tonight. Next. So one of the items that we need to review is our staffing based on enrollment. So we do staffing based on enrollment for our teachers, our classroom teachers, as well as two classified positions, which include school campus aides and school service assistants. So a quick thing about school campus aides. School campus aides.
Hey, Sam, can you just make it bigger on the screen so we can read it? Sorry.
I'm not the one sharing, so it would be Vivian who would need to try to make it bigger.
If you could, that'd be great.
School campus aides were known as noon supervisors prior to 2018. They were converted into school campus aides at that time period. Previously, they were hourly. Now they have FTE. And these are positions that supervise the lunchtime at the schools. They are generally 2 hour a day positions, if that. And so they're very small pieces of FTE that are combined into these numbers. So we have a staffing formula. So anything over 400, I mean, under 400, so 399 and down, you get 1.07 school campus aides, which again gets divided up into little 0.2s and 0.25s. For 400 and above, you get 1.33. And if you're above 500, I believe it is, you get 1.6. And then school service assistants are additional clerical support. So they work in the front office, supporting the sites that have a lot of students. And so only Malcolm X and BAM qualify per the enrollment formula because they have over 400 students for a school service assistant moving forward. And the FTE is 0.4 for each of those. Lindsay, I see your hand.
I'm not sure if I have it correct, but if there's no more front desk positions for most of the schools, how is the new security buzzer system going to work?
So there is still a front desk person. There's still the school admin assistant too at every single school site. This is
Are you
additional
talking
support.
about our secretary who chases down kids in the hallways all day?
Yes.
She is pulled in a million directions. Only Miss Irma at our school like greets the kids, is great with remembering them, helps with attendance because she knows all the kids and she's like, oh, welcome back. It's good. And plus, you don't want to have to go to Miss Irma for a late slip. So, I mean, I'm just saying this is the glue of our schools. And so I want to make sure that we're considering everything because the buzzer systems, I don't know. There's nobody at the front office at the schools that I go to.
Okay. So yeah, these positions were created long before the buzzer systems, and before they were even thought of. And these positions all come out of unrestricted general fund, which is why they've been brought to you guys. So our proposal is to go back to what we had in terms of staffing for the formula, because we did a hold harmless during COVID, and we haven't adjusted back. And so we would be adjusting back to meet the formula that existed for years before that. Rebecca?
I think Lindsay's question is so important. I sit on the safety committee as well, and the district-wide one, as well as Berkeley Highs. And, the issue around eyes and ears on making sure if we had an active shooter, for example, or something along those lines, or we know somebody's really paying attention to the doors. I'm not sure that this thinking aligns with where we actually are now, to your point, right? So this is from before the land of cameras that parents have advocated for so hard. And it feels a little off to me, right? Because we're doing this one thing, but if nobody's actually there or able to pay attention fully in the way that we would want them to, aren't those things sort of categorically fighting against one another?
Yeah, I mean, it would be a budget ask, which I believe we have budget asks later in this presentation, but it would have to be a budget ask for us to increase the school service assistants. Currently, they're only 0.4, so they're not even half the day. So in terms of them being the one who's responsible for answering the buzzer, that's not actually in their job description, nor is it their FTE doesn't make sense for that position. Vicky?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment for the record that this was brought to us several meetings ago and everybody sort of voted it down with the idea that staff would go back and find different ways to do budget savings and budget money. So it's a little frustrating to me that we're just coming back with the same proposal that we didn't like and didn't really endorse 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I don't know why we would think our mind would change on that versus staff coming back with something new that we could consider. So I just want to put that out there.
Thank you.
So we're actually revisiting these proposals. They have not changed. But remember, you are an advisory committee and we're hearing what you're saying, but staff also is putting forward solutions because we do have to try and meet the budget target, which, as you will see, has changed and which is also dependent on the governor's budget. So we take your point, but there are going to be situations where staff may differ from SBAC, but that doesn't mean that we're saying it's a done deal. Ultimately, it's a board decision. So we value everybody's input, but it's our responsibility to try and find solutions. So I really appreciate the discussion and I appreciate the feedback, but staff will be bringing things back to the team and there may be differences. We might not agree on everything, but that's what this forum is about. We hear your side, you hear our side. We take it to the board and the board ultimately decides. So thanks for your feedback, Vicky. Yes, Rebecca.
Thank you, Pauline. I just want to double check because this was flagged hard enough that I really want the board to understand. Will some framing around this sort of hot topic be given, or is the board just gonna hear that this is the recommendation? I'm not quite
No,
sure.
the board is gonna get the recommendation. When we took the 6.9, it was unanimous. We all agreed. The board has been in the past, we've been doing this for ever since I can remember. There are gonna be occasions where the board will hear what staff had to say, what SBAC's recommendations or concerns are, and they will ultimately decide. So it's a healthy discussion and a healthy process, but there is not always going to be unanimous agreement. So this is probably one area where we may differ, and you know, we're revisiting it. We have no other changes, we have no other suggestions. But as Sam says, these are 0.4 positions. The savings is 3.05 FTE. And as a reminder, this formula should have gone into effect 3 years ago. And we keeping the positions as is because of asks from SBAC. So not because staff presents it. We have been presenting it for 3 years. It has not been voted on. So it's not a done deal, but it's back again for discussion. So any other questions? Okay. Let's push on. Lindsay,
So
yes.
what's the dollar amount?
Let's get to the next slide. Can you just hold that question? It's going to be on the next slide. So let's make sure Sam is finished and then we can push on.
Yeah.
Sam, did you have anything else to add? Or?
So the reason there's a difference, I think Steve just pointed out, so the 3.05 that Pauline is talking about is the total sum. So there's some sites that are getting more FTE and some sites that are getting less because of the adjustments due to enrollment. So 3.05 is the final sum, but the number of positions that we have had to notice as part of the layoffs is the 3.73. But the actual final piece, because they have to move sites, is this 3.05 for the fiscal impact. Does that make sense, the difference between the two? Okay. So for that staffing that I just shared, it would be about 180,000, 181,000 that would be unrestricted general fund towards the target. The other topic that we're bringing back is the idea of freezing the bus driver's position. So these are positions within our transportation department. They were frozen a couple years ago. And it's 2.0 FTE, 2 positions full-time. And the equivalent is 120,000. They were frozen a couple years ago. And there have been changes made in the transportation department. But we are looking at continuing the freeze is what we are proposing.
For 1 more year.
Yeah. And Steve, I see your hand.
Steve has his hand up.
I want to point out that the savings won't be a full 120 because, as you know, Sam, one of the transportation supervisors basically drives buses on almost a daily basis and has been getting paid extra because of that.
That hasn't happened for a while, Steve. I meet with Sheila on a regular basis. Sheila no longer drives the buses, and Amanda very rarely. Are you talking about the dispatcher?
Amanda. No, Amanda.
Amanda, I understand that that has not happened as often.
Okay.
And so we need to make sure we have current information. And I meet with Sheila on a regular basis, so I think I have the most current information, but I'm not at that site, so.
Okay, I'll trust you.
The other thing I would say about that is that even if we were to unfreeze and hire these, it does not guarantee that the supervisor would not be driving a bus. Because we do not have subs for our bus drivers. And so when we don't have enough bus drivers to drive on a daily basis is when the supervisor has to step in. I see Frank and I see Beatrice.
Yeah, I just want to talk on the bus drivers. Also, it's my understanding that for years now, since the freeze has happened, it's not solely because of the freeze that they had some vacancies that's hurting that department, is creating a problem with the routes. Where my understanding is we have one vacancy and that might be getting filled soon, but that would not solve the problem. They still need more bus drivers. And one of the big issues is that they have to reroute the bus drivers sometimes. And it was stated at the board meetings that when this happens, you get students who are left on the bus for anywhere from an hour to hour and a half when they have to reroute this. So that in my opinion, is a huge issue when you have students who on their way home don't get home for an hour and a half past the time they should be getting home. And by freezing these positions, it's not solving anything. It's still hurting. That department needs more bus drivers, and they have bus drivers who don't have routes, and those bus drivers are there to fill in. So the buses are the routes are being taken care of, and this would help a lot if we could unfreeze these positions so we could get bus drivers in there. And it looks like there's a trend that we're starting to slowly fill these positions, and this would be the wrong time to continue with the freeze. I think it hurts our students at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. Beatrice and then Lindsay.
Thank you. Thank you for that information, Frank. I was interested in hearing if we're spending a lot of money on overtime and substitutes, and how much is that also incumbent on what this budget is, or what you're proposing here. Does this, is that a lot, are we spending more in the substitutes and overtime for, because of absences? Does it make up the difference, or it's just also exceeding?
Well, I don't think we have one driver that's considered a substitute driver that is, I think he's a retired bus driver. These positions, so they don't have subs, but these positions have not been filled for several years. And if all positions are filled and everyone is at work, I understand the staffing would be fine, and I'm speaking to the supervisor. So these positions have not been filled for several years. They've been frozen. And even trying to fill our vacancies that we have is problematic. And Sam may be able to speak more to that. It's been hard to fill some vacancies, but we are working on that. So filling these two positions was a suggestion that was made by the manager of transportation, and it's back on as a suggestion. And again, there doesn't have to be, 100% agreement, but it's good to have the discussion. So I appreciate that.
So just one more question. With the enrollment of TKs, did that up the amount of bus pickups also that was needed?
I think they redistributed you mean the current one or the projected one? Because there's going to be one next year. So we depend on the transportation department to do the routing, and they do the route. And
if I tell you that
Jesse, can you mute, please? So I could bring Sheila back to and some other transportation staff. Frank, I know you work closely with the team, and I know you presented to the board. So probably we can bring them back to have more of a discussion. But
I'm just curious if that also just bumped up a lot more routes that were needed for the district. And is there any TK money? Because the district is getting additional funding for the TKs, that could also serve some of that gap in funding.
we could look into that. Thanks, Beatrice. Anybody? Vicky's hand is up, and then Frank.
Yeah, I have a clarification question. So the statement says that these have not been filled for several years, but that's because they've been frozen. So is there
Actually,
additional?
it's the reverse. It's been frozen because they have not been filled.
Okay, but are there additional vacancies that are unfilled besides these two positions?
Yes, and
There is
Okay.
there's one vacancy currently, and actually the person is on the very final stage of onboarding.
Okay, so the idea is potentially we wouldn't be able to fill this position, or it would be difficult to fill this position even if it was unfrozen. And we do have a vacancy that they're dealing with now, so there will be at least one additional person next year unrelated to these frozen positions, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Frank and then Lindsay.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment that one of the reasons why there's always vacancies is pretty obvious, is that these bus drivers, these positions in BCCE or BUSD, I'm sorry, they're the lowest paying in the area, and that's just a fact. I mean, compared to every other agency out there, they're the lowest, so that creates a problem with the vacancy. We don't have currently, we have no training to try to bring in bus drivers, and if you don't train them in-house, then you're not going to get them. So that's another concern. The other thing I wanted to state was my understanding is that we contract out services because we don't have the bus drivers to do the work. And I think the contracting out is longer, not the routes to the schools, but special occasion type stuff that our bus drivers could do if there were more of them.
Yeah, we also need to mention, Frank, that we increased their hours. So the department has been proactive in increasing bus drivers' hours so they can do more field trips. So we need to acknowledge the other side of the equation. But we do have other agencies doing field trips, and that's a lot to do with the timing, especially with our athletics at the high school when they need bus transportation for athletics. It's during home to school transportation hours. So a lot of it has to do with timing, and a lot of it has to do with the priority obviously is home to school transportation. But I take your point, and we have tried to increase our bus drivers' hours, and I can have the team come to talk to you guys about it if you need additional information.
Also, I'd love to see the data you're referring to, Frank, because the data that I have does not show that we are below everybody else in school bus drivers. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Sorry about that. My internet crashed. So I wanted to second what Frank was saying about this being directly impacting students, and it has for years. The removal of the late bus has decreased the diversity of availability for after school programs and learns in some school sites. And they have been advocating for years to get a late bus back. And then the reduction in availability to bus kids to outside after school programs when Learns has such huge wait lists at every single school site also is a huge equity issue, and it causes a lot of stress and strain on our families, and sometimes the late enrollees, the ones who don't get their deadline in by, I think this year it's May 19th, it's really hard for them. So there are some student impacts and equity concerns with not having enough bus drivers.
Thank you, Lindsay. Any other comments before we move on?
Just as that comment, I do think, sorry, Pauline, I think that this was the note that we've been also looking at the ridership, and there's been a decrease in that ridership. And I also want to say that, you know, I think the other thing that would be a factor as we're, you know, considering sort of the bigger picture is that BUSD has also supported transportation to non-BUSD programming. And so, you know, there's a lot of things that we can take a look at in this regard.
Thanks.
Just to follow on that, a lot of times we say that ridership decreases, but we don't look at the core issues behind it. So if a kid is on the bus for 90 minutes, then a parent might move mountains to drive them instead, you know? Or if a bus stop, they move bus stops over a mile away from people's families' houses. So parents have to drive their kids to a bus stop a mile away in order to get the bus. And so some of these barriers are because the routes shifted and got longer, just as a anecdotal from multiple school sites.
Thank you, Lindsay. And it would be helpful. We can certainly bring back our transportation staff. And if you have questions, you can we can have them on the team as well. So I think that may be helpful. Any other comments before we go to the next slide? Jill, did you want to do your slides? We could go back and do your presentation.
Sure. Yeah, we just wanted to circle back on this LCFF general fund supplemental. I know that many folks have had a chance to vote, but there were a couple of folks that had questions, and so just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page and give people an opportunity to weigh in if they haven't had a chance to do that. Vivian, you can go to the next slide. So one of the things that we are going to be sharing with the board tonight is an action item on authorizing the use of an LCFF general fund reserve. And actually, just for a background, I think it's the next slide. Vivian, we can okay. Sorry, I don't think I updated the slides. There were a lot of competing priorities today, but the text here at the top has been taken from, there's a board policy on the LCAP, including a section on the reserve, which is, and the reserve, just to be clear, is not a function that is required by any LCFF or LCAP rules or regulations. It's something that the BUSD board had developed. And we have what is called an LCFF general fund reserve in the amount of $1 million. There's a provision that we can use that reserve if there's a year-over-year decline in the funding that's generated by our unduplicated students. So this was meant to show that we, in 21-22, we were getting a supplemental budget of about $6.2 million, and that has declined over time. And then we had the stack vote that you see there, where there's two competing parts, a couple of competing parts though. So Vivian, go back one more slide. One is that we've had a decline in our supplemental budget. So you see here at the top, we have a projected LCAP supplemental budget of $5.6 million. We have a we have a projection of budget expenses of 5.8. So every year the expenses go up a little bit, mostly because our supplemental LCAP budget is almost entirely staffing, and so that's going to adjust over time. It's roughly 5.8. There's been a slight adjustment on a couple of those digits. So we knew we were running into a deficit just with the base items in the LCAP related to the supplemental budget. What was added last year is what you see on the bullet points below, some of which because they came from teacher and staff input, and some came from our parent advisory input. And we had capacity in LCAP carryover to cover these additional costs, which we do think are aligned, particularly with the ELD, TSA positions to the unduplicated students that the LCAP is intended to serve. So in total, we have about a $170-ish thousand deficit between the projected expenses in the budget, plus about $600,000 because we had been using LCAP carryover. And to be clear, the LCAP carryover had been generated for two reasons. One is we had some unfilled positions over a period of time that had accumulated, and we had what I've been calling, it's the state's eighth entitlement. Periodically, they send an additional allocation as they are closing and resolving their book. So when I first came on board, BUSD had received an additional $200,000. So we had some growing capacity there. So what we had proposed to SBAC was as we are developing the LCAP, right? And then I heard Pauline mention, we also don't have the May revise, and the governor's budget is going to get approved after our board is going to have to vote on the budget, because that won't be until June. We have this weird situation where we've got a timeline that dictates statutory staffing notifications that Sam was just talking to you about in advance of when we have an approved LCAP and an approved budget and a strategic plan that is coming, but is going to come after this whole process wraps. And so I learned about this general fund reserve, and the requirements is that we need the board to be able to authorize us to use that fund. It would be one-time expenditure so that we can preserve these expenses in our supplemental budget, even though these are considered general fund. And that's the action that we were asking SBAC to weigh in on. I don't think I have, is there another slide after that? After that one? Yeah. And we have done homework to try to identify where we might be able to move other expenses. And this one, where we might be able to move other expenses, but we still have a shortfall. And I think what I wasn't clear about last week is that we would still want to prioritize the ELD teachers, because that is a priority that has come up from our advisory groups, which means that we would have to reduce some of the other expenses in the supplemental budget, which include staffing positions, which are on the board agenda tonight for potential reductions, which would be inclusive of some but not all of our OFI positions. Vicky.
How much money do we have in the reserve?
$1 million.
Just $1 million. Okay, so it's not an excessive amount. And then I guess I was wondering if these are one-time things, are there, and we're asking to move 486, is that where we're about half of it?
Yeah, it's about half of it.
Okay, I guess that was just I don't know if there was other things that we could include, like some of the other cuts. Because when we're looking at vision schools, for example, transportation is a big thing. Or if we're looking at some of those front desk staffing positions, if we have disproportionate schools with more unduplicated students than others, perhaps that 0.2 funding can come from LCAP. If there's other things that we could potentially cover from this reserve for a one-time thing. But I'm assuming you guys looked at all of that, or did you look at like other things in the general fund that this could maybe cover, or only things that LCAP was already paying for?
It would have to be other things that LCAP is already paying for, because another component in the resolution is that it would be spent on one-time actions or services that are listed as increasing or improving services for unduplicated students. Right, so we're trying to align those expenses with what's already there. So general fund expenditures would not be an appropriate use of the LCFF general fund reserve.
I have another question. I'll let Lindsay go first though.
So one thing I don't understand is this is a reserve fund that is sitting in the general fund right now, but did it come from LCFF funds or LCFF supplemental funds?
Supplement.
Unspent. So supplemental funds. So
Yeah.
these funds still should go toward unduplicated students, but they don't count as increasing the percentage or improving the services year over year, correct?
I think it.
The MPP?
I think there was some stipulation in the use of the reserve.
Yeah, so
Some language that talks about that.
the language says the funds shall not be used to satisfy the requirement that the LCAP, to satisfy the MPP requirement. So we've more than met the MPP requirement in what we've got tagged for supplemental.
Okay, and then when I did the math
Adding
on
more to that, yeah.
Okay, so it's not toward the MPP, but it's still for the same use, because supplemental funds need to go toward unduplicated students, which is homeless, foster youth, low income, and English learners.
Yes.
And because I sit on the PAC on the LCAP, I'm just saying this out loud for people who aren't as entrenched as some of us. And then my next question is, like, the math is kind of, I don't understand the math, because you say that the gap between the projected spending for next year and the income for supplemental funds is $174,351 on the previous slide, or the, I'm confused on which direction it is on the slide deck at this point.
You know what? I realized that was confusing, and I have a cleaner slide that I'm going to be including in
I can stop sharing, Jill, if you want to share.
Yeah, Vivian, can you stop sharing? And I'm going to share. This is a little bit of a cleaner slide. So again, this will be a little bit clearer. Sharing. Okay. Well, not share that way. Slideshow share. Oops, sorry. All right, so and I rounded my numbers a little bit. So the difference between projected budget and projected expenses is about $180,000 We had added an additional $600,000 on with carryover. So that brings that total. Oh. Sorry. I pressed something. That brings that total to $791,000. We have identified capacity in BSEP for a couple of these expenditures. We have split funded positions for our RTI TSAs. Currently, some of that is being funded in BSEP, and a portion of that is being funded in the LCAP supplemental dollars. And so we're shifting the equivalent of a 1.1 FTE for the RTI onto BSEP. So that helps reduce that gap. Similarly, we have RJ counselors at the middle school specifically that are partially funded by BSEP and partially funded on the LCAP. And so we're shifting the equivalent of 0.39 onto BSEP, which reduces the LCFF expenditure. So we're not reducing FTE, we're just changing the funding source for that position. So this math might,
my question then is like, I understand that in years prior, we proudly spent in our supplemental funds over what we had gotten, with the understanding that some of these positions don't just serve unduplicated students, right? We don't tell RTI folks, you can't serve non-unduplicated students, and we don't tell our restorative justice counselors, you can't help kids who are not unduplicated. And so it was never presented, at least in the PAC in years prior, that it was a problem to earmark supplemental funds over what we were having, because it's an understanding that that kind of covers the fuzzy nature of helping those who need it.
Yes.
And so to me, it seems like an interesting quandary now that we're being brought, that is a new theory, at least for people on the path.
Sorry, Lindsay, that last part cut off. I didn't hear you.
Yeah, because my dog is barking, you know. Thank you, package delivery people. So it's a new theory, at least to the PAC, that we should keep our supplement, because the checkbox says LCFF supplemental funds contributing, right? And then we never know what the percentage is that the LCFF funds are contributing to that source. Like, for example, AVID costs $444,000 a year. LCFF supplemental funds contribute to a certain amount of that. The PAC has recommended no longer funding AVID through supplemental funds. So, I mean, there are ways through this, but I don't know. I have a lot of questions about this list in particular, I guess. And how last meeting we talked about the EL teachers going into the general fund, which is a more stable resource, but then we are saying now that this is a one-time only solution. And I would love to see EL teachers being stably funded, just as I would love to see other programs stably funded.
Yeah, I'm not in disagreement with you about that. What we're saying is we would prioritize the LCFF. So all things being told, that wasn't, sorry. To answer the last part of your question, we do not have an alternative funding source for any of these components other than what I just showed you. There's a small chunk that we're moving to BSEP, and then some other expenditures where we have either other grant funds or we have duplications that we can cover in other resources. We do agree with you that we need to prioritize the ELD TSAs, not just because it was recommendation from PAC and from DLAC, and I'm seeing Kathleen Marte is here listening to this conversation, but the board approved a multilingual learner master plan last year, and as a component of that, we conducted a needs assessment, and we recognized that we have some service delivery gaps, particularly for our English language learners, that we need to make sure that we cover. So what we would want to do is prioritize those ELD positions in the LCAP supplemental. That would mean that we would have to deprioritize other components. And because we're in this tricky situation where we have statutory deadlines about layoff notices, which have to be issued by the 15th in advance of an LCAP approval, right? We're having to make some decisions about, how we're communicating those layoffs, recognizing that we don't have a final decision. So absent an additional capacity with this LCFF general fund reserve, then we would need to be issuing some layoff notices for certain positions, not because we don't value the work that any of these staff members do, but because we're in a situation where we don't have confirmed funding sources.
Well, there's other things that the PAC has recommended to shift out, and then the EL teachers would be safe within our supplemental dollars, not the supplemental reserve. I mean, I'm just saying that the PAC has ideas, and I would be remiss if I didn't represent the group.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Should I put the presentation back up, Jill?
We can, but I see Vicky and Mildred's hand, and I think I was trying to find the slides to make sure that I could insert that one while we were talking.
So I have a general question about all of this. So maybe it's a process question. When Jill was, or when Sam, I guess, was giving the presentation about the potential layoffs, we didn't look at the complete list. So I'm still unclear of what that complete list is, and if that's possible, would like to look at that. But also, like, what does that actually mean? Because if we're sending a notice because we have to send it legally, does that mean that we could, again, 2 weeks later, tell them, okay, now we have funding, so your job is secure, but like they may have found another job? Or are we deciding that we're not going to fund that job even if we found funding 2 weeks later for it? Like, I'm unclear what that means and how staff should consider that.
So the list is actually attached to the board agenda. And I can share it with you guys as well, but it's the resolution to the board for layoff notices. But the reality is that we have to give the notices by the actually 11:59 and 59 seconds on May 14th, so that otherwise those positions are automatically continued and we would have to find funding, which would be problematic in terms of our planning and everything we're doing and how we're moving forward. So we have to give them a final notice. Yes, we can still rescind them, but yes, we do take the risk of those people going and finding other jobs, all of that, and all of that piece. And we also understand the morale part of it, where we want to rescind as many of these as possible because we respect and appreciate all of our employees. And we don't want to have to lay off anybody if we could help it. But unfortunately, we do have to go through this process.
So I guess my next question is, in years past, have we just had more money in the general fund that we could cover these positions if the other funding wasn't voted on in time? Because I know, like, the PTAs in the past haven't given the money by May 1st before. And we were asked this year, to provide that early. So is it just because there's no general fund buffer that is why we're having to do this?
That's a portion of it, but that is not the full piece. It's the overall picture completely, because very few of the positions that are on the layoff list actually directly impact the general fund, unrestricted general fund. But yes, we would have to find funding, but it's also because the state law changed. So classified positions prior to—
I'm sorry, you cut off. The state law what?
The state law changed ed code for classified. It used to be a 60-day notice for classified. So we would be able to wait until practically the school year was over and we had a budget to be able to give those notices. And we would already have the budget process. We'd already have the plans, all of that. Now we have to do it March 15th and the May 14th piece that didn't exist previously. It was a 60-day notice, regardless of whenever we wanted to do it throughout the school year. So it's changed for classified. Certificated has been the March 15th piece ongoing.
Okay, and then my last question is, I did look at that list going to the board, and there were a lot of positions on there. I guess I was surprised to see, because we hadn't really talked about them, at least at this meeting before. And so, for example, all of the OFI positions are on there, but OFI staff directly supports unduplicated students and nobody else. So I'm just wondering if we could use that supplemental funding to cover those positions, and how much more of the supplemental funding we would potentially need. And I know that they're just to say this so no one else has to. I know there's an issue with, OFI regarding data and, outcomes and measurements, but I feel like it would be, the program is doing good and we only know that anecdotally. But if the district were to provide measures for them, they could start taking and managing that data, but there's just not a system in place for them to do the measurement. And it shouldn't be on the OFI person to come up with their own measurements. So I just want to say that in support of that program.
So I just want to make two comments there just to correct to a record. Where the layoff notices are not for all of the OFI positions. It's for, I think it's 4.94 positions. So there's about 11 staff members in the OFI team. So it is a situation where we have a body of work that a team manages. It is a team that has grown over time for lots of important reasons, not the least of which is the services that they provide to our students and families. I will say it's also been a department that has been in development, right? That we didn't have a supervisor there for a really long time. They moved places. That team has been doing a lot of work to reorient to a family engagement framework, right? And to calibrate on some shared practices. We also know that in the LCAP development, one of the recommendations that we made to the board and we're moving forward with in the draft LCAP is the addition of a goal around parent engagement, because the state has a priority on parent engagement. And we do have required measures that the state attaches to that. That's just sort of related to this like bigger picture question that many of you who sit on other advisory bodies have been talking about, which is that BUSD really needs a system for program evaluation. And I wish I could wave my magic wand and say like, oh, we're all going to do it this way in this time. But there are lots of infrastructure pieces that we have been working really hard to put in place, that we are having shared data, that we've got shared data components, that they're getting put into a same system, that we're building data routines for people. We've got some quantitative data, but we also realize that for a lot of our work, we need qualitative data too. We also have competing systems. The city has a program evaluation component. We've got a format that P&O uses. And so my team is, we've been running on a gas tank that is slowly exploding. A couple of you have commented that you see my team in all of the places, because we have a handful of people who have to be in all the places. And we keep talking about when the dust settles, right? Like we need to bring these groups together to get a clearer process in place. But we can have that conversation now because we've been doing some of that foundational work. So I do want to just acknowledge that I hear you. And, we're in this place where we're having to make decisions when we don't have A, fully confirmed budgets, right? And B, when we have a system that is really trying to move toward more data-informed practices, but that data right now are incomplete. And so we want to give people a little bit more time now that we have a better structure so that we can make a better evaluation. And again, all of these folks play an important role in all of the components that I think I see a lot of head nods, like, we believe that all of these are important to helping us achieve our district mission and ensure our student success. I see Mildred and then Matt.
My question is just really quickly, because I think I caught the tail end of a slide that you had up, and I was wondering, did I see a 0.39 restorative justice counselor?
It's a restorative, so that 0.39, you did see it, and I was explaining that we have moved 0.39 from the LCAP supplemental funding into BSEP. So we haven't reduced FTE in any way, we've just changed the funding source.
Thank you.
Yeah. Matt?
Sorry, I had to come late. I was in another meeting. So I see that, there's like a lot of discussion on basically this, hold on a second. Did shut your eyes. It's scary. Around like how this money's being spent in the carryover, but I think that it's important because the LCAP process is still ongoing and not finalized. Like, I think really what this group, in my opinion, is that we should say we're okay spending this reserve to support the LCAP plan. And we should let the people involved in LCAP through the PAC and the DLAC and all the other groups figure out the intricacies of how to do that. I just don't think that this group necessarily needs to go into that level of detail, because these things definitely interplay on each other, because we don't even know what that final LCAP plan is. And it may include, like someone mentioned, the 0.2 FTEs that now are in the overage that maybe gets included in the plan. So that would change what the overage gets spent on, but that part's not figured out. So I just think that we just need to agree, if that's the case, that we want to, use some of this reserve to support the unduplicated students. And then other than that, that's what I think. Sorry, I'm so whispering in my ear.
I love it. Thanks, Matt. So I did have on one of those slides, I think folks had voted, but we wanted to be able to, provide any level of clarity. So I don't know if we should just take a straw poll vote about a recommendation to approve the use of the LCFF reserve because this is agendized for tonight's board meeting in 45 minutes. Or are there folks who didn't have a chance to vote that now want to vote? I'm going to defer to Pauline and Vivian about what would be the best path forward.
The slide that's in the slide deck showed who voted. Rebecca didn't vote the last time, and Rebecca, is that check mark, meaning you're voting yes? So I think the majority of the committee voted yes. Vivi, if you could bring up back that slide deck, and let's go to the slide that had the vote count on it, and then we can move forward.
The one before, yeah, Vivian, if you could refresh the slide. There we go.
Oh, sorry.
So
I'm sorry to interrupt, but for my clarity, since we have to vote on this tonight as a board, is the will of the SBAC to leave it flexible for the plan to get flushed out if we use the reserve? Or are you saying use this reserve to not give notices to the people on that list? Because that's ultimately the decision I have to make tonight. Thanks.
So is there a response for those who voted yes? What are you voting yes?
I would vote yes for the flexible use once the plan is fleshed out. I would even go so far as to say like up to 60% or something like that. I don't know what that number would be.
I see Matt. I think with
a heart. Oh, that's new. So do we want to recap?
Matt's hand is raised, and it just so what has been agendized on the board agenda is approval to use of the funds not to exceed $500,000, which was half of it. So that was the marker that we were looking at. But that, you know, can be amended by a board member should they choose to do that. Matt, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just, you know, in terms of process, you know, we're an advisory group and we're not a decision-making group. And so we're providing, you know, advice or whatever the word is to the district, and the district will bring it to the board. And so it is the district's prerogative to decide how to bring that to the board and for what the board to, you know, vote on. And so I think that's why it matters more about whether we approve in general the use of the spending and let the district figure out with the big picture of all the funds and everything that's moving around, the best way to make that happen. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt.
And I just want to be clear for this group that that flexibility definitely appreciated, but given the statutory requirements for notifying people would mean that we would still need to issue layoff notices to folks that could potentially be rescinded. So want to make that clear, just because of the timing, because we won't have those other final decisions.
I think that's up to the district to decide though, because you, given what you are getting from this meeting and the yes votes or whatever, you know, you then can decide, at least in my opinion, how you want to go about that. And if it's important enough to the district to rescind those, then that's a decision that the district will make. You know, that at least SBAC's recommendation is that, you know, we spend this money.
Yep. Thank you.
I'll just note Nicole is on the phone and can't vote, but she would vote yes as well. So that would be 2 yeses from P&O.
Oh, okay.
We voting right now? What are we voting on?
Well, you voted the last time regarding the use of the carryover, the LCAP reserve.
Yeah, I voted right, Pauline, because my name wasn't on the list that I saw earlier. But I was here. I thought I voted.
Yeah, so I think you would be, do you see the bar at the bottom? These are the votes that we had received as of yesterday. So I just saw an update from, or heard an update from Vicky on P&O that one yes vote is now a 2 votes for yes.
Yeah, Stephen, I didn't record your vote last time. I didn't see it, so.
Was this not something we voted on at the last meeting?
Yes, we did vote the last meeting. I didn't record a vote for you.
Okay, no, I definitely meant to vote yes.
Okay. So that's local 21 that would add to the yes.
Yeah, and then Lindsay, your question in the chat is a little bit tricky because they are, they're interconnected because we have a number of positions that are currently funded on our LCAP funds. So we would need to, we would still need to issue those layoff notices, which.
But the layoff notices include those front desk and lunchtime supervisors that we voted no on last time and aren't connected to the supplemental funds at all.
Yeah, but the way that so the layoff list isn't separated into funding categories. So it's a single layoff list, which would be inclusive of positions that could be counted as services for services and support for the unduplicated student population, which would be the LCAP funded positions.
Okay,
So
thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, can I ask a clarifying question as well? So does that mean that the 3 ELD positions would then not be on that layoff list because that's the bulk of this funding. Is that correct?
No, the bulk of this funding actually involves a whole another set of staff. That was just the summary of like how we got to this, the overage.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so what we're talking about is we have, and Sam is going to be able to explain this better than me, but we'll practice. We have one process for classified and one process for certificated, and there are different provisions and parameters for that. So because of the classified, that these positions are classified, we have to meet the March 15th, not March 15th, the May 15th notice, which is different from certificated positions. Sam, I don't know if I explained that correctly.
You did fine. So the classified, the only option is layoff or continue. For our certificated, we have what is called a reassignment process. So a lot of our teachers, especially our teachers on special assignment, which includes a lot of our ELD teachers, receive an annual notice of potential reassignment. And so if we were to figure out that we didn't have enough funding to keep those positions, those people would be reassigned to other positions within their credentials, as opposed to being laid off like the classified are.
Okay, so to clarify, there's two questions on the table. The first question is whether or not to use the supplemental funds, which it seems like most people voted yes for. The second question is whether or not we want to lock in those funds on a number of the positions from the layoff list or not lock them in and keep them flexible. Would that be the second recommendation you're asking for? Or as Matt said, or should the staff just decide that without a recommendation from us?
I'm trying to process the two parts. So yes, and I'm looking at the votes. I think I updated the vote tally. I don't know if we have one for PAC, but so anyway, it looks like everybody who has voted yes. I have 2 from P&O, 3 from BCCE, 1 from Local 21, 1 from DLAC, 3 from BFT. Superintendent appointment is a yes, and UBA is a yes.
And PTA was a yes. It was in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
And GShack was a yes.
Thank you. See, I knew I missed some people. PTA, I gotta write this down. Okay. And then the second part of the question is whether or not what we're asking for is to lock in those specific positions. And so I don't know what the coffee cup means, like a may abstain.
Abstain.
Thank you. So sorry, I'm trying to process that second question.
Well, I think, doesn't that kind of go along with what Matt was saying, right? I mean, so you did lay out a specific list of items that add up to the amount we're going to use from the fund balance, right? Or from that balance. And so if we're voting on that, then it's specific, right? It's not. But I think overall, generally, the idea is that staff knows better than anybody exactly how these programs work and where we can cut. So really that should be decided by staff.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think what I was making the recommendation was then to utilize that to maintain those positions, but I'm hearing, I do recognize that this is situated in a context where we're having to make decisions with other incomplete information, not the least of which is a final governor's budget and a final LCAP plan.
I'm also unclear on what those positions are because I thought they were the ELD positions. And so I'm not sure which are the positions that would not get layoff notices if we approve them specifically.
It would be the OFI funded position. It would be 4.9 something. I can't remember the last digit, but almost 5.0 FTE of our OFI specialist positions.
But the OFE positions aren't on this list that you're saving here for the LCFF reserve.
That's for the part that I'm clarifying today, because I realized that was not clear.
I am so confused.
Rebecca?
You know, I just feel like there's a larger thing, you know, we had an opportunity, we talked about our subcommittee and kind of looking at the data around some of the programming that's maybe duplicative in some ways, maybe there's stuff that's out there that we know is working better, that kind of thing. And so I think some of this is about an opportunity to kind of have time to talk about that. We don't have it right now, and I get that. You have to, our goal is to not give so many pink slips so that we don't have to panic all the folks that don't need to be panicked about. Do they need to find another job? So I hear you. But I think my wondering is, as we enter into this next budget year, and I think there are many of us who are going to transition over and be with you next year again, Jill. That we have an opportunity to kind of do a bigger dive maybe earlier to really go through some of those programs, because it sounds like you're putting in place, you know, metrics that will allow us to have a fuller picture. And, you know, we've certainly heard about some of these programs and looked at some of the data that is pretty telling, you know, right now. So I think that's the thing that we want to potentially put a pin in, is having an opportunity to kind of do a deeper dive around some of the programs. Moving forward.
Yeah, I think that that's more accurate, because I know sort of related to this, like, you know, so we're trying to make, you know, decisions on, you know, programs and services where even if we had the data, causation and correlation are two different things. And we don't have a consistent way to do that in our current system, but we're moving toward that place. So one of the other discussion points for this group has been on other programs and services that are funded through general fund. We've been looking at, you know, Bridge, which is actually multi-funded, and, you know, we've got Avid, which is multi-funded, and we've got College Bound that has some general fund, et cetera. And, you know, and we also have a whole bunch of actions in the LCAP that, like, theoretically, like, really should help us accelerate outcomes for students. And I think those actions have lived in an infrastructure that hasn't been as stable as we want it to be. So, you know, I'll speak for myself. I'm a little concerned about moving some actions. I mean, there's some clear actions that we can move off of LCAP, which we're going to do, like, for example, the distribution of Chromebooks that lives completely somewhere else now in the system. But we have a lot of staff that really are intended to provide these additional services, but, you know, have lived outside of a context of accountability. And I feel like it's, you know, it's a little tough to start reducing those positions when we haven't made it clear to them at the beginning, these are the measures that we're holding you accountable for. Which, I mean, at least in my experience, they're very, you know, I wasn't here when the last LCAP was written. I wasn't here when those directions were given to staff. But what I do know is we came into a system that was like building a data management system, that we didn't have an existing MTSS system, that we did not have data routines that were consistent across our school sites or within our departments. And so we are moving to that place. And I feel like we need to give those actions a little bit more of a chance before we start to pull back on them, because there's been a lot of building support and momentum for those things that I think, we'll be better situated. And we are going to need to, while we'll get to an approved budget by June 12th, we need to turn around really quickly and start having these prioritization conversations. Because we're going to have another round of reductions unless there is some more positive news with the governor's budget. And that's my honest answer. But I think we've got to give people a little bit more time in a clear accountability system to see if some of these actions are working.
Okay, in the interest of time, we've spent a lot of time looking at positions and our LCFF. So if there are no other questions, I want us to start looking at programs and also the other things that are on the agenda. And we have about half an hour before some of us have to go to a board meeting. So if there are no other questions, I'm gonna bring us back to programming. And I know this is a little scattered and not as straightforward as the agenda was, but Jill, thanks for doing your part on the LCFF. I want to revisit the program side of things. We looked at the staffing. We brought back the staffing at the sites. We brought back the bus drivers. And now we're gonna revisit the cooking and gardening program. We got a lot of comments in for people who are here to talk about the cooking and gardening program. So the current proposal from the general fund is not to exceed $100,000. That was we weren't going to contribute anything from the general fund. And we're also going to be providing carryover, anything that's unspent from 23-24, which would normally be swept. We're proposing to actually make that available to the program. I believe Ben is here, and we're still finalizing some of the funding sources he proposed last time. And I think Lisa is probably still here. I reached out to Nutrition Services, Bonnie, the Director of Nutrition Services. She's still waiting to hear from regarding the $300,000 for her contribution to the program. Allen Foundation, I understand from Lisa, who spoke to Ben, that they had a board meeting and that there's going to be an announcement next week. And that's a funding source that was on the program. And then in terms of carryover from the prior year, that actually is not known until we close the book. So it's an estimate, but we're still truing up the information as we have it. And we will have additional information from the program at our next meeting. Any questions? All right. So, Vicky, yes.
Quick question. So if the Allen Foundation funding comes in, if I recall correctly, it was like something like $200,000 or $250,000. Does that mean that can cover our $100,000 contribution and allow us savings once we know if that money's available?
That would be my proposal, yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Vicky. So let's look at additional funding in terms of our one-time carryover and our new restricted resource. So there is a link to the presentation, and I'll share the presentation with you. So what we've done since our last meeting, we've identified funding sources, not all necessarily in the general fund. So there are other funding sources based on one time, and I'll be taking you through those, and we can see exactly what we're proposing, and some of these have been earmarked, and I will also share that with you in terms of staff's recommendation. So hopefully you can all see this, and it's in the presentation that I shared with you. So we had talked about carryover from resource 7388 when we originally proposed, I think it was in phase 1. We haven't identified a use for that 135. We're still exploring that. But what is new since we My thing is acting up, hold on. So, but what is new since we last met? Here we are. So, my mouse is sensitive. So what is new? We have identified additional COVID funds of 100 unspent COVID funds that was identified towards the end of April for $140,000. You can see it's in the consideration column and in the other funding solutions ongoing. Actually, there should have been one time, because that is, that would be a one-time proposal. So I'm gonna move that over into the one-time funding. And that's earmarked for RT Fisher's bills for 2023, 2024. This is one side of the equation. This is the revenue side. I'll be taking you through the expenditure side. We also found unspent COVID funds identified on 426, and we're earmarking that for assessment subscriptions. And that's for a different year. That's for 24, 25, one-time basis. We looked at our mental health spending in the, it's in the learning recovery block grant. So that would not be, I thought it was a general fund. I have to clarify that. But we had identified an unspent amount of $173,000. And I believe that was in the general fund. It's a one-time basis. That's earmarked for our meet counselor in 24, 25. And thanks to BSEP and the P&O, they had identified $600,000 on a one-time basis, and that has been earmarked to be spent on 24, 25 curriculum adoption. And also, there's a new funding source, the equity multiplier, and we weren't sure if we qualified for this funding, but we actually, BTech does qualify for the funding. It's restricted. It's 76,341. And that came in 23, 24, but we did not talk about it as a funding source for BTech. And we just want to make this group aware that, yes, there's a little bit more funding from the equity multiplier, and this will be consideration, I think, as we look at the following year to see if there's anything that we can that can go on this funding that will not supplant, but that would actually supplement the endeavors at BTech. Any questions on that? No hand, Vicky. No hand, Rebecca. Okay, I'm going to push us on. So that's our revenue transfer in the 173. Just in summary, it's $1.6 million, but you can see predominantly it's from other funding sources. Oh, Matt.
Great. Just a quick question.
Yeah.
So I see that you've done some earmarks. And some of those things were covered in general fund and some weren't. So I think specifically the RT Fisher one was in general fund fully for more than $140,000. Does this mean that we now have a savings of $140,000 in the target list or not?
No, we don't. That $140,000 is a 23, 24 expense that we invoices came to our attention, and we did not fully I think we did not fully fund RT Fisher. Jill can speak to that. We have like a little worksheet, but these were invoices, and I think there was some confusion between the Step Up Academy and RT Fisher. Jill, did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so that basically the RT Fisher contract is a $350,000 contract, and then the Step Up Academy was 166. And for some reason, those two got conflated. And so there wasn't
Wait, the
that-
RT Fisher was $350,000 and it did not include the Step Up?
No.
Correct.
Okay.
We thought it did.
That is confusing to me based on last year's conversations. And so I'm just wondering if the contracts got written I don't know, I have to go back to the board meetings from last year, the way that they were approved. I don't know. I'm just that just means that really there's an extra, well, I see it's getting taken care of, so that's good through this restricted dollars. But I think as we move forward, that, you know, that line item that we were looking at, right? Or, you know, for that contract wasn't actually $350,000. Really, it's $350,000 plus
Plus a stepper.
$140,000, which is a much, I mean, now we're coming up on $500,000 item in the
Correct.
general fund. So that's a kind of a game changer.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Yeah, I agree. So, and then, any other comments on this before we actually move on to the next slide?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that that's still a totally different service, right? So that's still actually doing summer school work for our most vulnerable students, who are African American students, in a culturally relevant way. So it's not as if that money was RT Fisher on top of RT Fisher. It's two totally separate activities.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Director Babbitt, I should say. I'm gonna take us to the next slide. At this point, it may be a good idea, Vicky, for you to present Nicole's.
Sure.
You want to share your screen?
Sure, I can do that.
I'm gonna stop sharing.
1 second. Actually, I don't need to share. I'm just gonna send a link to the proposal that people can look at, and then I'm gonna read her statement. So let me just put that in the chat. This is the proposal that was prepared. And then I'll read her statement. So basically, a group of us had gotten together and we were looking at all of the various programs regarding college readiness at the high school level. And so this was something that Nicole's bringing forth that we discuss at least through the P&O point of view. So the statement says, through this year's SBAC process, the great news is that we've found programs that are really working for us. We've dedicated BUSD staff and measurable outcomes for our kids. Last year, we went through this process and we expanded RISE, and they're doing very effective work efficiently within our local student populations. This year, I've learned a lot more about another program, Bridge, with similar success levels of 100% graduation rate and 85% placement in four-year universities. There's similar dynamics which make it successful, namely 5 days a week work with the kids for 4 consecutive years, frequent family communication on campus with integrated BUSD staff who know our district. Moreover, they achieve fantastic results very cost effectively. Bridge also serves our focal students, including African American, Latinx, low socioeconomic, and first generation college applicants. The key problem with Bridge is that they are over-enrolled and they have 86 students on the wait list that want to sign up for daily after-school tutoring with a 4-year commitment. But we don't currently have the space for these kids to take on this rigorous challenge, but we can change their lives. Right now, we have an opportunity to fix that. For an incremental cost of $175,000, we can fully enroll the Bridge waitlist and expand our support for the students struggling most in the programs. This additional funding would expand the program at the same cost-effective rate of the current work. The City of Berkeley, which also pays for a portion of the program, is slated to increase their support proportionately, but the city funds can't pay for the whole headcount. So the only way to serve more kids is for BOSD to increase our contribution accordingly. However, in these years of cost consolidation, we should try to fund this expansion through being more efficient. Hence, I propose that we disband the college-bound and young gifted and Black programs, both of which have much lower efficiencies serve less students, and as discussed, they have metrics. We should use these funds to expand Bridge. Doing so, we would realize a net cost savings of a 25K for the district. While all the associated funds are not part of the general fund, in many instances, we often shift items from one budget to another to achieve our goals. As long as they conform to the language of the funding source, this should not be an impediment on making this investment in Bridge and doing the right thing for the 86 kids in our district who thrive but now and beyond. The specifics are in the proposal, which I've sent a link to. And so this is basically based on our discussions and review of the various programs, looking at the number of students served by those two programs and alternative spaces of where the students are served. The recommendation is to increase funding for Bridge and then not fund those other two programs. And I can answer some questions if people have questions.
Are there any questions for Vicky? Okay, thanks, Vicky. So you've put a link in the agenda, and I think that was also sent to us, right?
I put it in the chat, and I believe it was sent to the group as well.
Okay, thank you.
Did you send it to me too? Or did you use the distribution list?
Say that again?
Send that to me separately, the link?
Oh, I can, yes. I'll send it to you separately.
Thank you, and thanks to Nicole. And where is Nicole now? She's on a flight somewhere. So
Yeah, she's flying home from a work trip. So she's the airplane took off about 15 minutes ago.
oh, okay. Okay, well, thanks for all your work on that. We will be revisiting this at our next meeting. Thank you. So the other thing that we're going to be looking at is at the other side of the budget equation. So we kind of touched on this at our last meeting. We've been focusing on budget balancing solutions that's on the revenue side, if you will, or the side that's going to either reduce expenses or increase revenue on a one-time basis or an ongoing basis. So now we're going to share the expenses. Some we've previewed on the earlier slides because we've already earmarked funding for those, for some of those, and then we have some other ones. So let's look at 23-24. So when we brought, or when we did phase 1 and phase 2, it was based on the second interim. And since
Colleen, can you make that bigger at all?
no, I can't. Sorry.
Mm.
But somebody else can. I couldn't. You know, that's the wrong slide. That's why. Sorry, Steve. You have the presentation, Steve. If you want to open it. I'm sorry. It's a cut and paste. It's a lot of information. But we had a settlement. It was a prior settlement for HR that came up after the second interim. And that was $50,000. We're proposing funding. It's related to benefits. So we're proposing using Fund 20. That's why it's in the other funding solutions column. SPED gives and SPED on gives. So these are additional amounts that we've determined to pay for the SPG contract. Since second interim, it's approximately $800,000, and this may be an ongoing cost, but it came to our attention that we needed to do this after the second interim. Matt, you had a question?
It just seems like some of these are choices and some of these are just more or less statutory or already there. So I'm just a little bit curious when you go through these, if you could say which of these are like ideas for us to actually consider versus like, if $800,000 was spent and $800,000 was spent, it doesn't matter what we say. So
well, it does sort of, because for full transparency, this may actually impact our target. So when
Yes,
our
so that's,
target was,
okay, so that's what I'm trying to understand is which of these, when you go through them, could you just say which of these, like this money is spent, right? So it will impact the target versus which of these is discretionary.
right, so we'll have a summary after we've presented all of these. None of these are technically discretionary. These are all obligations that we have to pay. And we're trying to be fully transparent in terms of what we think, how we think this is going to impact the target. There may be other sources, on unspent balances, when we close the books or even before that, that may be able to cover some of these. But right now I'm sharing with the team what our thinking is in terms of additional costs that may impact the target. So vote 16, this was the cost to put this proposal on the ballot. Oakland may contribute, and that's a proposal at this point. It's not a sunk cost because we have some board feedback on this. Sam has probably left, but we're required to do this contract in regards to our layoff. It was a lot higher. We think it's going to be about $5,000. And this is something that we would have to put in place year over year for negotiations. For BSEP, when we looked at the amount that we calculated for the teacher transfer, it was overstated by $350,000 due to an error. So we made a commitment that we'll be paying that back, either when we do the contribution at the end of this year, we will be reducing that amount by $350,000. And then the May 8th congressional hearing, which is on everybody's mind, we're identifying an additional $100,000 for travel, lodging, and legal costs. And these were not in our budget or proposed at this point. So this is something that we're looking at as well. Vicky?
Yeah, can you repeat what the SPED contracts, what that was for? You
As for the
said three letters.
What is speech pathology group? We contract with them.
For the speech pathology group. Okay. And
Yeah.
then I'm wondering if because you said this might be ongoing. I know Sean's not here, but perhaps at the next meeting, if we could ask him to come back with a plan of a possibility of, rather than contracting this out, have actual workers and do a cost analysis of what the contract is versus if we had staff doing that work.
Yeah, he has that on a 24, 25
Okay.
proposal. So on the next slide, we have we'll address some of that.
Thank you.
Dan, I saw Dan's hand and then it disappeared. Dan? Okay, so this is unfortunately, this is the general fund asked $1.3 million total. Most of that in the general fund, we think we can cover 50,000 in another funding source. Then we're looking at 24, 25. This is costs for 24, 25. And of course, bearing in mind that anything that's one time in this budget cycle, in the 24, 25 budget cycle, will have to be revisited in 25, 26. So it's a short-term solution, but it's one that staff is proposing at this time. So for LCAP 24, 25, we're proposing using the amount that was identified on the previous slide from BSEP's one-time contribution of $600,000. We'll be using that for curriculum adoption, literacy science, and social science at a cost of $555,000. And this is the SPED slide that I'm sharing with you. There is an additional ask for caseloads in terms of mild, moderate, and mod severe staffing, but there's also an offset of $166,000 by hiring staff internally. So Vicky, I think SPED is doing some of that, but they're also faced with the challenge of having an increased caseload. So we have to increase on one hand, but when we bring it in-house, there's a bit of savings, so we're showing both sides. And just in terms of the way the negatives mean that's a cost, the positive means it's something that we can be used to offset the cost. Ed Services budget priorities, these are the subscription assessment subscriptions. We're proposing using other funding for the $143,000, and that was mentioned on the previous slide. In terms of staffing, we're looking at additional students. The final student count has to be determined, so it could be shifting students, but at this time we have identified 29 additional students for the TK class. I haven't scored it because we haven't finalized the staffing as yet. And if we need additional TK class, we're also going to need an assistant for that class. So that's a potential of 2 additional FTE. The peer mental health counselor, that's the $90,000. The expense and the revenue are actually scored as one-time general fund, coming from the general fund. For athletics, this was on our ask for last year. It scored on a tier 2 level, so it was not funded last year. So it's back on the table. And this is for 0.2 athletic director, to increase the FTE by 0.2. Their operational expenses and the explanation is in the justification column for $71,000. And there's also the ask for stipends, to increase athletic stipends at the high school. So the total of the ask for 24-25 is $1.2 million, of which 480 will be coming from the general fund, and the rest will be we're looking for alternative funding to pay for some of these. Any questions before I move us on? So these are this is like the overall picture that we're looking at. We had our asks, we had our one-time revenue. We're now looking at the cooking and gardening. So now it's gone from 300 to 200. We're revisiting the staff, I have to move you guys out of the way because you're in the way. So we're looking at the school sites based on the formula, the 3.5, and the transportation continuing to freeze, the bus driver positions. So and it's just a duplicate. It's not double counted. It's just based on how I actually cut the details. So there's a net increase of $409,000 overall. The general fund is going to be looking at an increase of $1.1 million on an ongoing basis, and an increase of $47,000 on a one-time basis. And this is the net of all the columns, which I didn't copy above, I apologize. And then the 44,600, that's BSEP offering 600,000. There's still 44,600 that has not been earmarked, and the others are then other funding sources. So this is the net impact of what we're looking at now. And of course, our challenge is to make sure we're looking at what we've already proposed, what's been approved. Where are we? We're going to be looking at the big picture after this. Vicky, yes?
Are we gonna discuss whether or not we recommend all of those items?
We're not gonna vote this tonight. We're just gonna, it's just information at this point. We'll be bringing back more proposals. I know we have just one meeting left, but we may be adding meetings to get us to our point. And unfortunately, the government, well, let me just continue and then we can see where we're at. So we're going to continue evaluating budget strategies. I know it's late in the day, but we're not quite there as yet, just in terms of other proposals that we're still thinking of. we would continue to use our core values of resource allocation. And we've been doing questions throughout. So our next meeting is May 15th. We have 2 workshops, one on May 15th, and I think the other one is the 17th. And we're trying to, at that point, bring final, or not final, but updated proposals for your vote. And then we just got an input from Nicole. So if there are any other items that you would like to propose, you can email Vivian. But we're down to the wire and we're all waiting to see what the governor will propose in his budget. And with that, we're 1 minute over and some of us have to get to the board meeting to close session. So any questions or any comments for us or any feedback at this point?
Thank you for putting the big discussions up front and the info items at the back. I really appreciate that.
Sure, no problem, Lindsay. Thank you. Okay, guys, well, I'm gonna say goodbye. And I think we will be having another meeting. I'll be waiting. I'll be working with Superintendent Ford Marthel when she's back from her meeting in Washington. So that's it, everybody, and I will talk to everybody later. Thanks for your input. I appreciate the discussion. Okay, guys, bye.
Bye.